The ethos and heart of my next book is that just about nothing is what it is. Instead, as the title of the book would have it, it is what you make of it. And I realize that shifting from it is what it is to it is what you make of it, it's a long process and can be a bit daunting. More so when the is we have to work with, our circumstances and opportunities, is really sideways or even broken. When things go wrong or the unexpected takes over, it can feel like the most natural thing to do is to navigate to, grab hold of, and cling to something solid and sure. What if, on the other hand, on occasion at least, I read the lack of solid ground or the absence of a sure thing as an invitation into adventure? That's what I find inspiring and informative about Laura Joyce Davis and her work. That while I don't blame a soul for looking for sure things and more solid ground during the COVID era, she and her family took this as an opportunity to dive headlong into the unknown and see what they can make of the pieces they found there. She is a writer, and she is the host of the Shelter in Place podcast. She is also my guest on this episode of the At Sea podcast. Check it out. So where are you talking to me from right now?
I am in our new little apartment where I can't remember. I don't think this was set up when we talked last, but we are now relocated in the seminary, like married student housing, I think is where we are.
Oh, wow.
At Gordon Conwell Seminary. So, which is where Nate's dad works.
And Nate is your husband?
Nate is my husband, yes. And normally this would not be an option, but because of COVID, they have all these empty apartments. And so it's very lucky for us, I guess.
Wait, who's
actually an open apartment?
Nate's dad works there?
Yeah, he's a professor here.
So you're kind of living with your parents. I'm just pointing it out. I mean, it's not. Well, there's no shame. We all have to go back sometimes.
Okay. I mean, his dad doesn't live here.
I know.
He just works here.
I'm giving you shit.
We don't actually see him. Not during the day, anyway.
That's really
doing a lot of dinners at their house.
Let's retrace that because you're not from there. You're actually from out here. You're kind of from Oakland-ish, which is in a sense. I mean, we talked before. Like you're from Oakland. You kind of still feel like Oakland is home, but you're where you are now. There's sort of this travel thing. Can you talk a little bit like how do you end up where you are right now geographically? Talk about like sort of the impetus for the trip and let's just start there and then I'll go backwards from there. Like how do you end up where you are right now geographically, physically? Like how'd you get there?
Yes, that's the question, right?
Yeah.
Yes. Well, I think the first thing I should say is we've been in Oakland for 16 years. So we have a house there that's very much home. My husband's from the Boston area and I'm from Minneapolis originally, but we've been in Oakland a long time. And we had no plans of leaving Oakland really at all. I mean, even, for years, our families would always say like, when are you going to, move back to family? And we would always just say, well, we're not. Oakland is home. We feel like it really suits us. We have an amazing community there that we're missing very much right now. But with the pandemic, of course, a lot of that community kind of fell away, didn't disappear, but, either went online or, as I think most of us have experienced, there were just a lot fewer relationships that were in our life on a daily basis, and especially our support structures.
Yeah.
So we kind of were, we were hanging in there for the first, I would say, 6 months of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. And I think probably the other thing to mention about that is that very early on, my husband lost his job and, was one of many people who got laid off like 2 weeks into shelter in place, I think.
Yeah.
And that happened to coincide with me starting this podcast, which is called Shelter in Place. Yeah. And I thought that, the idea for the podcast came to me March 16th. March 17th was episode 1. And I thought, this will be great. I'll do a daily podcast 6 days a week. This will just be like my own little project. I'll do it for 3 weeks. I'm a writer by trade, so it was a great little writing project for me to do. Maybe some people would hear it, maybe they wouldn't, but this would be a great way for me to mark this moment in history for myself.
Yeah.
And of course, that 3-week project turned into 4 months later, 100 episodes later,
Yep.
A full-blown job. And in that time, my husband had lost his job. At some point, we kind of realized the podcast was gaining momentum, and it felt like, wait, this isn't just a creative project, but it's actually, because it's kind of got a very memoir heart to it. I mean, there's a lot else I can say about it, but my story is kind of baked into it. And because of that, we were sort of rewriting our life as I was writing these episodes.
Yeah.
And it was daily. So it was happening in real time. And so at some point, my husband, was not finding another job quickly and decided, he really believed in this work. And so he was going to come work on it with me. And so we are, fast forward to August, we'd been doing this work together for a few months at that point. And distance, I should mention, very important detail here. We have 3 small children.
Yes.
So our kids are 8, 6, and 3.
So it's no small thing to be deciding in light of anything. We're going to reinvent.
Exactly. I think there would probably be a lot of people who would just say, that's crazy. That's not wise.
Did it feel crazy? Because we haven't really gotten to the part where things get totally bananas, but at the point at which
exactly.
But at the point at which, like, it happens, right? Like, people lose their jobs.
Yeah.
That happens.
Yeah, it does.
But you did something different with it. So he had lost his job, was looking for something. You had started this project. That happens too. We start side hustles, interests. It happens all the time.
Yeah,
but you did something else.
Started, and I should say, I never ever would have started that project if COVID-19 had not happened. I mean, if you had told me, oh, you're going to do a daily podcast and you'll do 100 episodes in a row, not even 5 days a week, 6 days a week, I would have just been like, no, that sounds terrible. I will never do anything like that. So it very much was a project of the moment. And, but to answer your question, I think, it was crazy and we knew it was crazy, but at the same time, I think going into the pandemic, even before Nate lost his job, we were kind of at that place that I think, at least a lot of families in the Bay Area, I see this happen to, and I suspect probably families all over. And that is, even before COVID-19, life just felt barely sustainable. And, we were not even the people who had the packed schedule all the time. And yet, with 3 small kids and, a pretty intense, wonderful community in our neighborhood, in our school, in our church, we had all these deep relationships, and we were involved at our church and involved in our school and all these things that we rarely would have, an evening where something wasn't going on or a weekend that was free. And I think there was just this frenetic pace that, on the one hand, we loved our life in Oakland, and on the other hand, it just felt like we were almost just going to break down at any moment. Yeah. And so I think we were sort of primed to make a big change. And sorry, this is like a big tangent, but it's a relevant one.
Absolutely.
Going into the pandemic, we were actually, for about a year, we had been actively planning a sabbatical year. And that's kind of a story in and of itself. But the short version is we were going to be in Mexico starting in July. I was going to be doing actually another podcast project that never ended up happening, but it was all about U.S.-Mexico immigration. And I'd done these interviews, and I had applied for a Fulbright, and we had done all of these things to prepare for that. And we're very, very close to being ready to go when COVID-19 happened. And then Nate lost his job. And so we kind of, at some point very early on, had to pull the plug on that. So in many ways, I think we were already just shifting gears like crazy from like day one of the pandemic. And so I think by the time we got to the point where Nate decided to work on this with me and we decided to kind of go all in on the podcast, we had already been letting things go, just over and over and over again for months. And getting more and more used to the idea that everything we thought we could count on, we actually couldn't. And
Yes.
we needed to maybe just, as much as possible, start from scratch.
So there are a couple things I want before we go deeper. You keep dropping these incredible gems. I want to pick up on a couple of them.
Sorry,
no. It's beautiful. Here's the thing. Is like, one, you said you're like, hey, this is a tangent. I was like, yeah, but your freaking life for the last several months has been a tangent. Like, you know what I mean? Like, so this whole question, like, what's tangential and what's not? Who the hell gets to decide that? Like, no, this is a tangent. Exactly. Someone would have said, this is what I love about what you've been up to, is someone could look at what's going on in your life and say, this is peripheral, that's neat, but let us know when you're done with it. But you're saying, no. Yeah, it could absolutely look like this, but this is not it. We're fully here. We're fully present in this thing that other folks might consider tangent, and even part of your own psychology wants to call this tangential, but it's not. This is actually your life, the way you're living it right now.
Yeah, it's true. That's absolutely right. Yeah. So I think you're right on about that. And I think I had, after that very relevant, not tangent, I was about to say that, with August, our kids, our two older kids anyway, were going back to school, which is to say they were not going back to school. They were distance learning.
Yep.
And we had sort of been limping along with trying to work, trying to be there for our kids, trying to, not completely neglect them, getting help where we could, but mostly not having help. And with school, and we're part of the Oakland public school system, and Oakland Unified OUSD announced in July that they would not be going back to school in person, certainly not for the first month. And we all kind of knew at that point, we're probably not going to be going back to school this year at all.
Right.
So, we all went through, actually the episode I'm working on right now is about this, and we all went through this kind of scramble. I think all of us Bay Area parents, I don't know if you did as well, but of trying to figure out, how the heck are we going to survive this year? Because when you have two working parents, it's not an option to just like expect that your kids will be fine without you, especially when they're that young.
Yeah.
And yet we needed to work. Here we are, essentially, we have a startup with this podcast. That's, for lack of a better word, that's what it is. We were pitching to places. We were trying to, get support from donors, all of these different things, get sponsorships, and working like mad to get that going and make it sustainable. And at the same time, just, did not have the bandwidth to be able to also give our kids what they needed, which they basically needed somebody full time.
Yeah.
So long story short, we were not successful in figuring out any kind of workable solution in the Bay Area. Not a great one anyway. I should say we did finally, in the beginning we were like, we don't want to have to pay a tutor. We want to, do a family co-op. We want to figure out how to support each other in our community. And it was so incredibly complicated to pull. We did try, hours and hours on the phone with other parents, but in the end, it was just not possible, mostly because people had different risk tolerances for COVID stuff. People had different availability to help out with something like a co-op. And so in the end, there was really only one other family that said, yeah, okay, we'll pair up with you guys, but we can't help. So let's just pool together our money and let's hire somebody to be with the kids. So that's what we did. We sent our 3-year-old back to preschool at that point because it felt totally impossible to have a 3-year-old around with these other two kids trying to be, quiet on Zoom calls. And for a week and a half, we were like, well, this isn't ideal, but, maybe it's good enough. And we were, of course, nervous financially about spending all this money on childcare, but it just felt like, well, this is just what we have to do. Mm-hmm. So that was the first week and a half of school. And then, as any California person will know, that second week of school, I think it was like August 19th or something like that. It was a Wednesday, and we got the news that, well, no, actually, we didn't get the news. We woke up to smoky skies. Yep. That was our first indication that the wildfires had come. And it was also a heat wave, so it was like 100 degrees. We all moved inside because the air quality was so bad that we couldn't, the kids had been in the backyard, but now they had to be indoors. Our house is not a big house.
Right.
It's a little, 2-bedroom house, little bungalow in Oakland, and we don't have air conditioning. So it's very quickly gone from being like, well, this situation isn't ideal, but it's workable, to wow, this is pretty miserable for everybody.
Yes.
And it's only mid-August. If the last 4 years are any indication at all, the wildfires will probably not end until late October or November, basically until it rains. I mean, that is how it's been the last 4 years.
Yep.
So that night, we actually, for the very first time, had that conversation of, should we go?
Yeah.
Should we be somewhere else for a while? And it wasn't, even then, even though life suddenly felt even more unsustainable because of the fires and the heat and, all the COVID restrictions, it became, something that we didn't want to do, but felt like we were idiots if we didn't at least have that conversation.
Yeah. Well, and I love
so
that,
really,
again, the shift here that you do it sort of smoothly and it's semi-unconscious, but it's like the decision you make to say, it's a matter of will, that your circumstances are a matter of will. It's a thing you decide.
Yeah.
Like, we could stay. You even said, like, it's not like there weren't options on the table. There were.
right.
You didn't like them. So,
Yep.
and again, the way we often communicate these things is like, oh, there just weren't any options. It's like, no, there were options. You're not choosing them. And whereas, like, and to embrace that is actually part of what allows you to say, here's this adventure we're going to set out on that resets our existence entirely. And it's a choice we get to make. That there wasn't going to be like some adventure fairy who's going to like drop off the adventure on your doorstep. You know what I mean? Right. There's no like Uber adventure app.
Yeah.
You just freaking choose it. You make a decision. It's a matter of will. And by sheer force of will, you looked around and said, we don't like the options in front of us. We're going to grab this existential machete and start cutting our way through the forest.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that's right. And I think it's worth noting that when we were having that conversation, I mean, Wednesday night, first day of the fires, we started talking about it. We had this big whiteboard in our living room. We were making, lists of reasons to stay, lists of reasons to go. And even though it was very clear quickly that there were a lot more reasons to go at this point, which, by the way, had never been true in 16 years of living in Oakland. I mean, we had occasionally made those lists before for other reasons, and never did we even feel like, oh, yeah, we should think about going. Mm-hmm. But this time it was different. And even then, we just were kind of hoping, man, we really hope there's a way to be able to stay, because we really did not want to go. I mean, we feel that rooted in Oakland, and it really does feel like home. Still? And has for, a really long time. Yeah. I mean, I would say still. So we, all that is to say, we talked a lot about it. We, did what we do a lot of, and we obsessed about our list, and we kept revisiting it for 48 hours and praying a lot. And I think our prayer was, man, if we're supposed to do this, like, God, would you just make this super clear to us? Because we don't want to go, but we will if that's what we need to do. And so that Saturday, that was Wednesday, we started the conversations. By Saturday, I think, each passing day, we were a little more open to leaving. And then Nate finally called his parents, which if we were going to go anywhere, it would be near his family, mostly because his mom is the only one of the grandparents who has any sort of capacity to help out with our kids. And she also, fun fact, homeschooled 5 children incredibly well. I mean, this is a woman who is like brilliant and, went to school with Hillary Clinton and has an MDiv for fun. And,
an MDiv for fun.
Just I mean, she, I don't know.
Who does that?
Know if it was for fun,
it sounds great. What are you doing Wednesday? I'm thinking MDiv. I was thinking about a master's. I was either going to go hiking or get a master's. I don't know. I can't decide.
She's a firecracker. She's incredibly just a brilliant woman who has a ton of energy, more energy than I think I've ever had. And she's in her 70s. But anyway, we finally called her and asked the question of, like, if we did this, would you be game for helping us? And we tried to be upfront about like, this would be 5 days a week. This is a lot to ask. And she said yes. So even then, we still had not decided to go. But literally within minutes of Nate getting off the phone, we got an email from our preschool saying that they were shutting down for 2 weeks because one of the teachers had COVID-19.
Oh my gosh.
And then, of course, our distance learning pod immediately dissolved because they didn't want to risk exposure to our 3-year-old in case she, had been exposed to COVID. So we went overnight from having, not a great solution, but a solution to all 3 kids at home. The wildfires were happening. No outside support. And it just felt like the thing that we needed to kind of tip the scales. And then 3 days later, some friends of ours said they could rent our house. So it happened incredibly fast. And 2 weeks after that first conversation, we were driving away from Oakland and setting across the country. So that is how we came to be here now.
So you said a thing a minute ago about, you used the word success. And I'd love to hear you talk a little bit about what that word, like how are you applying that word to your life now? The metrics that we function with regards to success for a lot of us have sort of fallen away. Like this is what success used to be.
Yeah.
Is, these kinds of numbers, this kind of longevity. I would love to hear you talk about like, how are you marking success? And that doesn't have to just be about the podcast, but like, I'd love for you to at least start there. You set out, you're like, hey, I'm doing this project. I'm going to do this podcast daily, potentially podcast, which isn't daily now. You can talk about that, like I'm making that decision later on, but like, I'm going to start this podcast, this daily podcast. And then COVID-19, fires, like rising prices of all things, like the world comes after you and squeezes you out of the life you're trying to live. You make this decision to like revamp and not just kind of white knuckle it and fight through, which, let's just be honest, most people are trying to do right now. Yeah. It's like most folks are honest to God trying to like just hold on really tight to what they have, hoping to God it either comes back or lasts, which it probably won't anyways. Instead of doing that, you make the decision to let go, okay, bye, and reinvent. Well, along with letting go of those things, like our metrics, your metrics for like what does successful parenting look like? What does a successful career look like? How are you measuring success over the course of the last, what are we, like 8 months now? Like, what's success look like for you with the podcast, with parenting? But start with the podcast. Do you feel like you're successful with a podcast? And if so, how? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah, it's such a good question. There's so much there. I think I should say first, I'm 41. I think being in my 40s, I view this so differently than I did even 5 years ago. But I've spent most of my life as a fiction writer. That's what, that was my training. I got my MFA in fiction. That's why we actually moved to Oakland in the first place back in 2004. And so I've been in that world for a long time. And in that world, it's pretty intense. I mean, it's incredibly cutthroat. There are so many good people that you're up against all the time. Even getting an agent is tough. And then getting a book deal, even once you have an agent, can be tough. Yes. And I do literary fiction, which is just like the worst, right? I mean, I love literary fiction, but it's the worst to get into because there just aren't many spots at the table these days, because of what's happened with publishing. And, we now have fewer books being published, especially in literary fiction. We could have a whole separate conversation about that. But, I have had some, I still don't have a book published, after all of these years. I have short stories published. I have essays published. I've even won some big awards. I mean, some awards that I could, objectively say, okay, I was a Fulbright scholar in creative writing. I won a big, the Poets and Writers magazine has a big award called the California Exchange Award. And it's this crazy award where they fly you to New York for a week and wine and dine you and introduce you to all of these very influential people in the publishing world, people like the New Yorker editor. I got to sit in her office and have a meeting with her. It was an amazing award. And yet, I think I did not feel like a success most of the time.
Why?
Because I didn't have a book deal, and that was the thing, right? That was the thing. And I had novels that I got really close with, agents who would tell me they loved it, but they weren't the right one for it, and they believed in the work, but they weren't the right one for it. I have just dozens of these letters over the years, and I stand by the work that I did. I think in some ways, I'm glad that I didn't get a book deal way back then, because I think I've become a much, much better writer in that time. And I do think, the fiction I'm writing now is much better than what I wrote 10 years ago or 20 years ago. And I still have hope that that'll happen, even in today's publishing climate. But I think something that the podcast has shown me about success is that, even when I had short stories published or awards that I had won, things that, were out there for the world to read, most of the people in my life had never read anything I'd written. I mean, other than emails, right?
And even at that, let's be honest about the emails.
Right?
Did you get my email? I lost. I don't know what happened. Maybe it got lost in the ether. You didn't read it, did you? I don't know what happened. I'm not sure. Did you? When did you send it? Is it from a different email? You didn't read it, did you?
No, email's tough. But, I think it always felt a little bit lonely to be a fiction writer. And,
Yes.
Fiction will always be my first love. I'm never going to stop writing it. But because most of the people that I loved and cherished in my life didn't even know that part of me. And I get it, right? We're all busy. We all have different things we like to read. You can't keep up with everything. But there was something about pouring my heart and soul into this work and just having it completely not connect to anything else in my life. And I think that's been really something I didn't expect with the podcast, but that I've loved, is that all of a sudden I have this way to put work out there. And it's, I've done a little bit of fiction in the podcast, but mostly it's memoir and some interviews and, kind of day in the life kind of stuff. But it has given me a way to put my writing out there in a more public way. And, I don't have to get a book deal before it can happen. I can just, edit my audio and push publish, and it's out there. And there's something really fun about being able to not only put the work out there for people to hear it, but there's a sense of completion. It's like you finish that episode and you push publish, and that's it. And then you're on to the next one. And
how beautiful that is! Like instead of waiting for the gatekeepers, it's the same kind of how should I say? It's the same kind of power move, right? Is like here, and this is why I was asking you about your metrics for success, is because the entirety of what you've decided to do since March could be viewed as compromise by someone else. That what success is like, hey, look, you had a house in the Bay freaking area. You were living in the San Francisco Bay Area. You owned shit in the San Francisco Bay Area. You lived there. You were paying for life. Like you've arrived. Hold on to that.
We got in before it was impossible. Absolutely.
Right. But then you let go of that, and you're like, well, okay, we're shifting now. And in the same way, like, and I talk to my clients about this stuff all the time, is like, well, I'm not published. I'm like, well, did you share something in your blog or Facebook? Oh, yeah. Okay, then you're published, and you get to decide that. You're a published author, and you were just saying, like, I didn't have the book deal. It's like, yeah, but that's crazy sauce. That you could write something right now, push it to Facebook, and have a wider audience than 90% of the books that have ever been published will ever see.
Right.
Because what's the average book sell, like 100 copies or something like that? I mean, it's something along those lines. Like the average album when we were still making CDs sold less than 200 copies.
Wow.
Whereas nowadays, like, you can be a 17-year-old, 16-year-old, 14-year-old kid, like, put together a song, upload it to SoundCloud, and have 2,000 people listen to it before the end of the day. Like,
that's amazing.
Shift your metric. Like, what is success? I don't know. What do you want it to be? Like, you get to decide what success is for your life and for your career. With the podcast, tell me a little bit about, like, things you know now about relationships that you didn't know before? Because a lot of what you're doing with your interviews is you're not digging. It's not like a romance thing, but you really are like digging into like, look, what connects people to one another.
Yeah.
And look, not just like why these things matter in the kind of the broad macro sort of like relationships matter, go make friends, but specifically digging into people's particular situations, particular stories, and particular histories, and about their connections with, you use the word community a lot, with communities, with tribes, with family. What are some things you know now about relationships and about the human desire and need for relationships that you didn't know before you started this? Are there a few things?
I think there are. I mean, I think I have to think about it and answer that, because I don't know that they're new since the podcast. I think I've just they've come to light in a new way since the podcast. I've thought a lot about this, and I think actually, weirdly, or maybe not weirdly, being a fiction writer has in some ways set me up really well for podcasting, because in literary fiction, you're always thinking about story. You're always thinking about characters. You're always thinking about, what creates tension and what resolves tension and what makes for an interesting read. How do you pull people along from one page to the next? Right. And not just have it be a page turner, but have real substance. And usually with literary fiction, that means characters. And, not all, but a lot of great literary fiction is more character driven than it is plot driven, and it can be both, of course. But I think it took me a little bit to realize that's what I was doing. And of course, if you listen from the beginning of season 1, you can hear my learning curve. It's because I'm doing it daily. It's like, you can just watch me learn to be a podcaster and learn to edit audio and all of that. And I'm very grateful to have learned all that. But I think especially when it came to interviewing, I did not set out to do this, but I had 100 episodes plus bonus episodes in season 1. And 50 of those were interviews. So it was just a ton of interviews to be doing in a 4-month period. And I talked to some absolutely amazing people. I mean, just wonderful, wonderful people who I feel like it was a gift to get to, spend an hour with, or however long we talked. And I think what always interested me in those conversations the most was, kind of what makes them tick. What is the thing that's most important to them right now? Yeah. And somewhere or another, we would always get to that question. And, we had conversations about all different kinds of things, but I would always try to ask people about, in my interview with you last week, I asked you, what's your greatest hope and fear? And that's a question. I don't always ask people the same questions, but that is one question that I try to ask everyone, because I think we are in this moment in history where there's a lot to be afraid of. Yes. But I think we have to be searching for reasons to be hopeful. And once you get at that, if you do have a reason that you hope right now, it says a lot about who you are as a person. And I'm not going looking for a specific answer. I think it's fascinating how many different answers I get to those questions. But I do think it reveals a lot about what's important to us in this world, and what we hold on to when, the bottom kind of drops out underneath us. Yes. So, that's a long way of saying that I think that desire to portray complex, nuanced characters in fiction, it's the same thing I bring to my interview conversations. And I think also kindness. I had a wonderful teacher, Yoon Lee, who, she said this thing that I'll always remember. She said, you even your characters who are kind of like bad characters, or, the enemy or whatever in the story, you need to treat them with kindness. And I have always tried to do that, to not vilify anybody. I'm not interested in making anyone look stupid or, wrong about their beliefs or anything. I really want to show people in the beauty of their full humanity. And so I try to approach my interviews with just a lot of kindness, the same way that I would my characters. That's good. You have to end up, you don't have to end up, you spend some time, you push stuff to, you push stuff to the internet. You don't spend a whole lot of time on traditional social media platforms. Yeah,
Like,
I'm trying. It's a weak spot.
yeah, well, and so is that let's talk about your like the conscious decision process there, where it is a place insofar as like there's general disconnect, sociologically, tribally, we can't. It's part of what fell apart for you was like you couldn't see some people, and but the internet theoretically, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat makes those things easier in some ways, right? To stay connected.
Yeah.
Can you talk about your process and your thought process specifically behind, like what's been your experience of online relationships? You're a fan, you're not a fan. You're a fan, you're not great at it. You're not great at it, you don't want to be. Like talk about like being online and in a relationship with people. Is it satisfying? It's dissatisfying. You're scared of it. It should be scary. Like where are you in that camp? And the reason I ask is because part of what the COVID season has drawn out is a pretty serious conversation about what it is. How should I say this? But what we mean by relationship, right? Is like,
right.
Does it count? Does being connected on Instagram count? And if so, how do we count it? Does like you have these friends, unquote, quote unquote friends.
Yeah.
Are they friends? Is there real intimacy over Instagram, or is it all fake, etc.? Like, this is, I would suggest, like a vital human conversation. I don't think this is one of those peripheral things. I think this is one of the conversations that like 25, 30 years from now, those of us who have actually invested consciously in the conversation about like what does it mean to have relationships online will be far better off than those who feel like this is some peripheral crap that's going to eventually go away. Yeah. So talk about your experience of life online, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, etc., and like where you're at now in terms of your comfort level and in terms of like your desires, your interests, your experience. What's it look like for you?
Well, I should say, first of all, I'm trying to get better at it. We try to at least post something daily on Instagram with the Shelter in Place handle, which is Shelter in Place Podcast, if anybody wants to follow us. And so, that has been something I've been trying to up my game since starting this podcast. But I'm terrible at it. I think I'm getting a little better, but I think I've never been somebody who's great at social media, and I don't love it. I think it maybe has something I don't have a problem with it categorically. I'm not one of these people who thinks it shouldn't exist. I do think there are some really wonderful things about social media, and I've found people, through Instagram connections or Facebook connections. I mean, it's how on our trip across the country, we took 3.5 weeks to make that drive. And one of those stops was reaching out to my college roommate who I hadn't seen in 17 years. I mean, I think the last time I saw her was at my wedding. And this was somebody who was my best friend in college and was dear to me. And, we'd had a few phone conversations, but she has a bunch of kids. I have 3 kids. We both lived in different parts of the country. We fell out of contact, as a lot of people do. And it was such a gift to be able to reach out to her. And, I found her through Facebook. And so that to me is wonderful. That's like social media at its best, right? Is we actually get to keep those connections, even if we're in and out of each other's lives for years at a time. But I think what I've found for myself personally, and I think some people do this better, but I don't like being the person who has my phone on me constantly. I think even before COVID, maybe especially before COVID, it was kind of a pet peeve when I'd be, say having coffee with a friend and their phone is right in front of them and they keep, jumping and looking at their phone every 2 minutes. It just really breaks down that in-person interaction when you have somebody who's only giving you partial attention all the time. And I try to not be that person who's giving the people around me partial attention. I'm not by any means perfect at it. Just like everybody else, I do have my times where I'm staring at my phone and I should be with my kids and really, fully giving them my attention and being present. But I do in general try to be present with the people that I am actually in the same room with. And I think one interesting thing about COVID is that of course, I'm not in the same room with people the way that I used to be. I mean, we used to do a lot of hosting and a lot of, we loved having friends over for dinner, or having parties in our backyard, or, all sorts of ways of getting physically together. We're not doing that now. But I think what's interesting is I call people a lot more. And I mean, I think for years, I almost never picked up and called anyone on the phone. And over the last, 8 months, whatever it's been, I'm finding a lot more phone conversations, and also stuff like Marco Polo and Voxer. I really have appreciated those ways of being able to leave messages for people that aren't just, a line on Instagram.
Yes.
And again, nothing wrong with Instagram. I think it serves a purpose, but I think most of us, if we're honest, when we get on those platforms, we kind of just feel bad about ourselves pretty quickly, because somebody else's life is looking better than ours. And again, I don't feel like I'm somebody who that like deeply affects me, but I am aware that there is some effect there happening when I'm on those platforms. And so I try to not let it suck up hours of my life. I try to get on a little bit each day, put something up there, about the latest episode or a picture or whatever, and enough to kind of remind people that I'm alive and that the podcast is alive.
Still here.
But I try to, but honestly, there's too much else around me in my daily life that demands my attention for me to feel good about spending that much more time on it. And again, no judgment for people who really enjoy that. I think for me, I would rather be physically present with somebody in the same room, or even over the phone.
Yeah. I usually ask my guests, particularly more thoughtful guests like yourself, about the future, and this and the frame for this question. I think it's helpful to kind of restate the story every once in a while too. But I think you'd appreciate is when I got started doing music stuff. So my like public persona career thing started with music, with rock and roll, and I was similar-ish thing where like I had a decision to make, and it was literally just a matter of sheer will. Like the math didn't add up, but the opportunity was there, and had to make a decision. So I was, single guy living with a few other single guys in this guy's house named Frank. Frank ran a record label, and I was just playing songs. Similar thing. I was like, I just picked up the guitar and was playing songs. It was a small little thing. It was like, we'll see what happens. It was like I would write songs just to process my life, because it was a way emotionally for me to connect. It was a way for me to like have some kind of emotional control over what was going on in my own head. And but I was making my money as I was doing youth work and teaching, raking in mad sums of cash with working with kids.
I know, they make great money,
killing it at public education. So and Frank came to me one night and he's like, "Hey, have you ever thought about playing music, like for a living?" And I said, "No, you think the songs are good?" And he says, "No, the songs aren't good, but I like you." And I was like, "Okay, what?" And then literal months later, and I don't remember all of this stuff, but I took some headers. I took a couple shots. I was like, "Well, we'll see what happens." So literal months later, I'm in Nashville, Tennessee at this showcase for artists, and Frank gets on a stage in front of like 200 industry persons. And he says, "This is Justin McRoberts." And you've seen some of these things, like you go to these showcases and like whether it's the label head or the or the publisher, the like, here's our the new book, and it's gonna change everything, and nothing will ever be the same, right? And everyone's doing that, right? This is so and so, and they're great, and they're fantastic, and they're better than fantastic. They're gonna rearrange what you think about the word fantastic. They're gonna be so great that the word great won't work anymore, and that kind of thing. And Frank gets up and he says, "This is Justin McRoberts, and he's the artist we'll be focusing on this year." And I'll be honest, he's not that great right now. It was like how he started the thing off. And I'm standing behind him holding my guitar.
Nice. You're like, oh, confidence booster. Awesome.
He was great. Thanks. He did, I kind of expected, things like this from Frank. But then he said, but I expect that most of the bands that you would have seen this morning probably won't be playing music 2 to 3 years from now. I think Justin will be making music 15 years from now, and I think it'll be great, so I'm making a long-term investment. You can either make it with me or not, and then walked off the stage.
Fantastic.
Right? And I mean, it was one of those things where it's like, in the moment, it's kind of like a little bit deflating, but it just reset my expectations so that when things went well, it's like, great, things are great now. But it wasn't everything. And then when things did not go well, I was like, okay, this sucks, but this isn't everything. So I know that's the context of the question, is like, what does your life and work look like 15 years from now? What I'm wondering, though, is does the future even hold place in your heart, your mind right now? Is that not even that you're just living day to day per se, but like, how much space does 15 years from now even take up for you in your soul?
Yeah, it's such a good question. And, I think in my 20s, especially, I was that person who had the 10-year plan and the 5-year plan and the 20-year plan. And I think at some point I had to put them aside because life was not rolling out the way that I planned. Part of that was realizing that I was planning things that were completely out of my control in most cases. But I think at this point, it's not that I don't think about the future at all. I definitely do, but I think I care a lot more about relationships, and that doesn't mean that, I'm not excluding that from my work. I think one of my kind of great areas of growth as a person, in general, but as a mom, has been realizing I'm never going to be that mom who is satisfied just being with my kids. And that's not a diss on them. It's just, I think some people have that gift. And then I think there are others of us who we need something more to sustain us in the day to day. And I have found, whether it's writing fiction or doing a podcast or something else, I found my art to be that thing. And so learning how to bring those two things together has been incredibly important, not just for me as an artist, but for me as a mom, because I don't want to neglect my kids and I want them to know that they are precious to me. But also, if I, to be quite frank, if I stop writing and all I'm doing is being a parent, I'm pretty depressed pretty quickly. And I spent some time, probably a handful of years fighting that and feeling really guilty about that, because I could look around and I could see stay-at-home mom friends that I knew who were just killing it. And they, were so awesome with their kids and so fulfilled. And I just have had to realize, like, that is not who I am. And that's okay. There are different kinds of parents, and it doesn't mean that I'm a bad parent, but I do need to figure out how can I incorporate my art into my parenting and vice versa. And I think the more I've learned to integrate those two things, kind of the better it's been for everybody. And so I think when I think about 15 years from now, honestly, my greatest hope is that whether it's a podcast or writing books or something else, that I'm still doing this, but that more than that, even that I have a great relationship with my kids. My kids will be teenagers by then. Lord willing, maybe one or two of them will have left the house. Although these days, who knows? So, I think thinking about how can I live my life now to set us up for that to be true in the future. And, I am the first person to say I fail at this almost every day.
Yeah, same.
Maybe every day.
Yeah.
It is the hardest, creative challenge of my life.
Good.
Is to figure out how to just be the parent that I want to be to them, and also to figure out, like, how can I be somebody who is content and who isn't always feeling discouraged by things not going quite the way that I want them to. So I think good. There's probably more that could be said there, but I think that's the main thing.
That's really good. Well, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. This was so fun.
A huge fan of the journey, the process, the podcast. The context of this, series of interviews is entirely about making what we can from what we have on hand, and
exactly.
The witness you are bearing to those who are paying attention to you is, I think it's enriching. I think it's challenging. And I think you do it in a really helpful posture that you don't, and I think you're gonna, I think you'll take this as a compliment. You don't come off like expert, hasn't nailed, pay attention to me because I'm on the mountaintop of this thing. You really do present like, I'm working through this, and the confidence I have is that this will work through if I put the work in, which is such a better posture. I would suggest in general, but specifically right now, we just don't need a whole lot of experts right now. We need a whole lot of you. We need a whole lot of folks who are saying, I don't know what the hell either, but I'm gonna put a foot in front of this foot, and then I'm gonna do that again. Yeah. And I'm gonna keep doing that until there's an obstacle, and then I'm gonna figure that obstacle out, and if I can work around it, then I'm gonna do that. So what you're up to is redemptive and challenging and very, very, very helpful for the season we're in right now. And I can only imagine will continue to be so. So thanks for doing it.
Thank you, Justin. That means a lot.
And thank you for joining me for this episode of the @Sea podcast. If you'd like to follow up with my guest, Laura Joyce Davis, you can jump to shelterinplacepodcast.info, not .com or .net, .info, shelterinplacepodcast, all one word, .info. And from there, you can jump to all the episodes of the podcast, as well as the About Me page that gives a great background about this podcast, its history, and the people involved with it. If you would like to be part of the team of people who make this podcast happen, the @Sea podcast with me, then go to patreon.com/Justin McRoberts. We would love to have you on the team. Until next time.